In a previous video, I've shown you how you can use a mock to test some functionality that makes an HTTP request. Using a mock, you can override an entire function of a class. In this video, I'd like to show you another technique that you can use to fake HTTP requests, and that is with Laravel's facade. Let's first take a look at the RSS repository, and you'll notice that I've made some changes here. In the previous version, I've used the load function to let the feed library itself fetch all the RSS entries in this URL. In this version of the code, we will take care of loading the entries ourselves. And we do this with Laravel's HTTP facade. We simply call get, pass it the URL, and we get the body. We transform that response to an XML object and pass that to the from_atom method of feed. Of course, whenever we run our tests, we don't want to make actual HTTP calls, as such calls can be quite slow, and if there's something wrong with your internet connection, your test will fail, and we don't want that. It's better not to rely on the network in your tests. So let's see how we can fake this. Let's jump back to our tests. Let's make some changes. We are not going to mock the entire fetch method of RSS repository anymore, but instead we are going to override this simple HTTP call. So let's remove this. And how you can do this is with HTTP. Make sure you pick the facade and let's call fake on this. Now how this works is that you can pass it an array, and the key of the array is the URL that you're going to call. So this is what we are going to call in our case. And then the response that it should give when that URL is being called. So new response. And here you should pass what you would like that HTTP call to respond with. So you can give it a body and a status code. In my pest.php file, I've already added a getFeed helper function that returns the XML that a normal RSS feed would respond. So I want to respond with that. So I'm going to call getFeed here. Let's import these things. Our sync external post action requires an RSS repository to be passed. But instead of doing that manually, let's just resolve this out of the container. So Laravel will inject that repository for us. And I think that we're good now. Let's try to run this test. And it fails. Let's take a look at the error message. So we expected a URL test.com, and what we found was example.com. In my test here, I'm using test.com, but in my getFeed response, I'm probably using example.com all over the place. Okay, let's change this. Example. Let's run the test again. And now it passes. So what we've done here is pretty cool. Whenever in your code you're using Laravel's HTTP facade, you can easily test it by using HTTP fake. To finish off, I'd like to show you a few niceties on HTTP fake. We're using a full URL here, but you're not required to do that. This key has support for wildcards. So if I put a star here, then this response will get used for all calls to example.com. So if I run this test, it should still pass, and it does. Let's try to break it by using another domain here. Does not exist, something like that. So now in our code, example.com will get used, but we haven't faked it, so it will actually try to go to the network, and it fails. Let's revert that change, and that passes again. And of course, you could also just use star to just match everything. But let's stick to just using the explicit URL here. Another nice thing that the HTTP fake supports is sequences. Using a sequence, you can test a chain of requests. Let's try that out. So let's first push a request getFeed, and I'm going to give it a title test A. Test A. Let's run this test. And now it fails because in our database we should expect test A, and this works. And let's push another response here. So we are going to push test B here. So the second time that our post action will get called, the title of each entry of the feed will be test B. So the first time that we're calling this, we're not expecting to see test B in our database. So let's assert that it's missing. But if we call this the second time, then the second response from our sequence will be used. And then we expect to see test B. Let's try it out. Test B. And that passes. I think using HTTP fake is a very nice and handy way to test HTTP calls or a sequence of multiple calls. This can be very handy to test, for instance, a complex API integration. In this video, I've shown you the basic options of HTTP fake that you'll probably use for 90% of your tests, but there are actually quite a few more additional options. Head over to the Laravel documentation to know more about them.